Hello campers! We are on week 7 of Virtual Camp with Kate. This week, we are celebrating the earth and talking about ways that we can help protect the earth, such as recycling. Before we do that, however, I wanted to spend some time reviewing everything we have learned this summer. We have spent 7 sessions learning about different parts of the earth and exploring and discovering all sorts of things about nature and science and math and all sorts of subjects. So I thought we could revisit each of those sessions to talk a little bit about different parts of the earth that we've learned about. So if you think way back to the beginning of summer, our very first week together, we talked about oviparous animals, or animals that lay eggs. We talked about birds and reptiles, and even a few mammals that lay eggs. There are also some animals that have live birth, and some that have eggs that hatch inside right before they are born. Those are called viviparous and oviviparous animals. We also made a bird feeder out of a recycled toilet paper tube, which a lot of us have around the house right now, and we visited my chickens, Saffron and Salt. The next week that we were together, we made a pinwheel to talk about cycles. We talked about how a cycle is something that starts and ends in the same place, like the seasons. The seasons go spring, summer, fall, winter, and then back to spring. We talked about some other cycles in nature, such as the life cycles of animals like frogs and butterflies, and the life cycle of plants. On a fun side note, next week, our last week of camp, we're going to talk about my favorite insect, the monarch butterfly, and you'll get an up-close and personal look at the monarch butterfly's life cycle. For our third week of virtual camp, we traveled to Millbrook Marsh and learned about the wetlands in action. We watched the marsh during a rainstorm. I also traveled to a wetland area near my house, and we learned about how water flows downhill and how the wetlands can be like a sponge where they soak up water and they clean water. We'll talk a little bit more about water later on today. For our fourth week of camp, which was halfway through the summer, we learned about how farmers grow food. Remember, we met Farmer Todd, and he showed us all of his equipment on his farm that helps him to plant and harvest the food that feeds animals. We also learned about the parts of plants and how plants grow. Hopefully your bean seeds are growing, and you can see the roots and the leaves and the stems as the seed grows. For our fifth week of camp, we explored the weather and learned about different instruments that measure weather, such as thermometers and pinwheels to measure the wind. And you made your own thermometer that's hopefully still collecting temperatures for you. We had a few chillier days last week here in State College, so I don't know if you did as well and if your thermometer showed you that the temperature was a little bit lower on those days. We also spent some time observing the clouds. So if you have a chance and you lay in your yard and just look up at the sky, you never know what you might see. Last week, we explored our backyards. We saw a hummingbird eating nectar from a flower, and we learned about native and invasive plants. And then you got to collect a few things and make imprints in clay, which hopefully you decorated and have around your house. Whew, what a wonderful summer it has been. All of these parts of the earth are special and wonderful. So today we are going to learn about some ways that we can protect the earth and keep nature just like it is. So things like saving water and recycling. And we're going to learn about those things, and hopefully you'll get some tips that you can share with your parents to help save the earth. So thank you for exploring with me, and let's go learn about recycling and about water. All right, so let's talk about the vocabulary words for this week. So the first word on your camp guide for the week is recycling. And we're going to talk a lot about different ways to recycle, but the word recycling means when you take something and instead of throwing it away, you renew it or use it for something else. So for example, you can put a lot of plastics in the recycling bin and they get melted and broken down and turned into other plastic. I've also seen some plastic turn into things like playground equipment and benches and things like that. Sort is a good word, and to sort means to separate something out due to similarities or differences. So when we go to the recycling center in a little bit, we'll sort through my recycling and put it in the right bin based on what it is for. So the plastics will go in one bin, the colored glasses will go in a bin, the clear glass will go in another bin. So if you sort something, you're putting it by its characteristics in the same place. Transpiration is a word that means evaporation. So when water evaporates from the surface of something, it is also called transpiring. So they're similar words. Evaporation and transpiration mean similar things. It means water floating up off of a surface in a gaseous state. So turning into a gas and floating up into the air. And then the final word is condensation, which is a word that we've talked about a few times over the course of the summer. And condensation is after it evaporates or transpires and the water becomes a gas and floats up, it condenses into clouds that will eventually either rain or snow, depending on what season it is. So these are two steps of the water cycle, which we will talk about in just a little bit. I thought that my pond was a good place to talk to you about the first cycle that you can find in nature. And as I am filming this pond, see if my goldfish come up to the top. I have 3 goldfish in here, 2 orange ones and 1 white one. Oh, I see an orange one in the back. So if you keep your eyes open, you might be able to spot one of my goldfish. So the cycle that I wanted to talk to you about is the water cycle. The water cycle is an extremely important cycle because it's how we as humans get water that we need to drink. So what happens is when it rains, it's called precipitation. Precipitation can also be things like snow or sleet or hail. So if you're a little bit afraid of thunderstorms, that's okay. But remember, it's just nature doing part of the water cycle. So it precipitates or rains or snows or sleets, and that water falls to the ground from the clouds. The water then will go into something like a pond or a lake or just into the ground. And when the sun comes out on a nice day like today, that water evaporates into the clouds. So it floats up as a gas and goes back into the clouds. Those clouds condense, which is another part of the water cycle. And when the clouds get super heavy, then they precipitate again. So if you listened carefully, it was precipitation, evaporation, condensation, and then precipitation again. So that's what's called the water cycle. So I brought all of my recycling over to the Hamilton Square area. They have a recycling center that you can sort out your recycling. Here in State College, if we put this on the curb, they will recycle it and sort it for us. But there are some places where they won't do that. And so I'm going to show you all how to sort your recycling so that these things can be made into new things. So the first thing I'm going to start with is the cardboard. You can see that I broke it down and it goes right into here. All right, the next thing I'm going to do is the paperboard, and that has to come on over here. You can see each bin is labeled with different things that you put into it. And so in this newspaper, mixed paper, magazines, and paperboard, look at all of our paperboard in there. Also broken down so that they're nice and flat. All right, so the next thing is plastic. And so if you look on the bottom of your plastic, it'll have a number. It's hard to see. If it's a 1 or a 2, it's in a little triangle. Let's see if we can see it better. Well, it's still probably going to be hard to see on the camera. But there's a little 2 there. And things that are 1s and 2s can go in the general plastic over there. If it's not a 1 or a 2, or if it doesn't even have a number on it, this one's a 5, then it goes in what's called miscellaneous plastic. And this is things like butter containers. This is an ice cream container. If you eat berries, the container the berries come in, that all goes in the miscellaneous plastic. And then finally, we have the rest of the plastic. We have glass. This is clear glass. If you notice, there's brown, green, and clear. So I'm going to put some in the clear glass. Makes a nice loud noise when you throw it in there. All right, and then plastic, remember I said number 1 and 2. It tells you what not to put in there. Sure, yeah, that is a 2. And then finally the metal. So at a place like this, you don't want to put scrap metal in here, but there are other places you can take your scrap metal to. Over at the transfer station here in State College by the mall, you can also recycle there, and they'll take some of your bigger trash items and things like that as well. All right, I want to show you how important it is to save the water that we have on Earth. So before I get started, I have a demonstration set up here for you, but I wanted to talk a little bit about H2O. You can see it on some of my signs here. H2O is what's known as the chemical symbol for water. So if you're a chemist, a scientist who studies the chemistry or the makeup of different things, you might call water H2O. And it's a quick way to write it. So if you write it, it means 2 hydrogens and 1 oxygen. So what that means is there are little atoms in the world that make up everything around us. Everything is made up of atoms. And so water, in order to get a drop of water, there are hundreds and millions of molecules in it, of these little things that make up that droplet. And so there are 2 hydrogens and 1 oxygen in every molecule of water. So if you see the letters H with a little 2 and then an O, that just means water. That's the chemical symbol for water. So that's what I put on these signs. Instead of writing water, I put H2O. So you can impress all your friends with your new knowledge of the chemical makeup of water. So I have a gallon of blue water. I dyed it blue. That represents all of the water, total H2O or water on Earth. What I'm going to do is show you how much of this is drinkable. So if this were the entire Earth, this is how much water would be on the Earth. So 70% of the Earth's surface is made up of water. So that's things like the ocean and freshwater lakes and rivers. It's also things like wetlands, which we visited a few weeks ago, and water that's in the ground, called groundwater, and water that's in the air, or the atmosphere. So this gallon shows you all of that water. Now, I'm going to measure how much of this water is fresh water. Because remember, we can't drink salt water. So the salt water that's in the oceans is important, but we can't drink it. So this is the amount of water that's fresh water on Earth. This is it. A quarter cup. A quarter cup of that whole gallon is as much water that is fresh water on Earth. So that's in things like rivers and streams and lakes. So if it's salt water and in the ocean, we can't drink it. So this is all the water, fresh water, that's available to us. Now, out of that fresh water, not all of it is liquid. So here you go. Some of that fresh water is frozen in the ice caps, or it's in the air, and we can't get it. So this is how much water is available to us in things like lakes and rivers and groundwater. Sometimes it's just hard to get too. So if you remember, this was the total water on Earth. This is how much of that water is fresh water. And this is how much of it is liquid fresh water. Now, the part that is the most shocking to me is usable water. So this is water that we can get to, and it's for us and animals and plants to be able to use. Are you ready for this? I have an eyedropper because it is literally one drop. Probably can't even see it. It is the smallest amount that you could think of that is available for us. So that's why it's so important that we try to use as little water as possible and keep the water that we have clean. Because, for example, humans use, in the United States, in America, we use about 70 gallons of water per day. So that's 70 of these per one person in your house. So if you have 3 people in your house, that's 210 of these per day. So the places that are best to try to make sure that you use less water are places like your bathroom. So if you flush your toilet one time and you don't have a water conserving toilet, then you use about 5 gallons of water with one flush. If you take a 10-minute shower, that's 100 gallons of water. If you fill a bathtub halfway, that's about 50 gallons of water. So remember, that's 50 of these in a bathtub, or 100 of these in a 10-minute shower. If you're brushing your teeth and you leave the water running, that's about 2 gallons of water. And if you, in the kitchen, if you use a dishwasher, one time is about 10 gallons of water. And the laundry clothes washer, that's about 50 gallons of water. So again, about 50 of these if you wash your clothes in one load. Now, the good thing is, there are people, scientists and others, who are trying to make things use less water. So if you buy energy efficient things, they save energy, and then also a lot of times they'll also conserve water. So some of the newer appliances, which you might have in your home, are getting better for the environment and better about saving water. But just think about these things when you're brushing your teeth. Shut off the water in between while you're brushing. So, wet your toothbrush and then brush your teeth, and then turn the water back on to rinse and rinse out your mouth. Try to take a shorter shower if you can. If you're not real hot and sweaty in the summer, you could take a bath every other day. And, maybe wear some of your clothes more than once so that you have less laundry. Your mom or your dad or whoever does your laundry will probably appreciate it if they have less laundry to do anyway. So just think about these things, because remember, we only have one tiny drop of water in the whole earth that is usable for us and for animals and for plants. We have to share all of that. All right, we are going to try our experiment for the week. If you have a WPSU backpack, then you'll see a box of raisins in your week 7 bag. These raisins are going to be used for what's called dancing raisins. So, water is pretty cool. You can do a lot of fun things with water. This is one of my favorite water experiments. So, if you have just regular tap water in a jar and you put some raisins into it, these are just regular old raisins, so if you didn't get a WPSU backpack, you can also still do this. All right, so I'm going to drop some raisins in here. Notice nothing's really happening. They're just sort of sitting there in the bottom of the jar. Remember, this was regular old tap water. Well, if I take water, so this is LaCroix water. It just is fizzy water. You might see your mom or dad drinking it. Maybe you've tried some. It has water that has some air in it. It's been carbonated. So I'm going to pour that into this jar. And we're going to drop some raisins into it. See what happens. First of all, hopefully you notice the bubbles. And you notice there's bubbles coming off the raisins. They're starting to dance. I'm going to leave it sitting here. So if you notice, there are a lot of bubbles coming off the raisins. So raisins have these little creases in them, and what you see happening is the carbon dioxide bubbles, are making the raisin flatten out. Now, my experiment doesn't seem to be working as well as it should, because these raisins are supposed to float around once they get their wrinkles creased out of them. So I dropped a new one in that I squished a little to see if that'll help. Sometimes experiments don't work the way that you want them to. So I'm going to try again and see if I can get it to work. But in the meantime, it also notes that you should be patient and give things time, because the experiment also has to do its job. So we're going to keep an eye on this and see if they start to dance in just a little bit. Stay tuned. So while my raisins aren't dancing, I do want to point out some differences. So this right here is the plain water. Notice that there's not as many bubbles on the raisins. And even if I drop in some raisins, there's some big bubbles that come up. On this side, however, if I drop in raisins, look at all those bubbles. So again, this water is carbonated, it has air in it, and that's what's causing all these bubbles. So even though my raisins aren't dancing, it's still pretty cool to compare the two different ones. So I thought I would try again with this experiment, use the same flavor of water, but try it at room temperature. So this one has not been in the fridge. The other one was. So again, I'm pouring it in. And these are the rest of the raisins from the box. I'm going to drop them in and see what happens. Hey, one already started to dance. They are moving around. So that was the key. You need to make sure that when you try this experiment, whatever fizzy, either water or soda that you use that's carbonated, has carbon air in it, carbon dioxide air, that it is room temperature so that your raisins will dance. Look at them dance. They're moving around, jumping up and down. Now remember, this happens because the wrinkles on the raisins flatten out because of the carbon air bubbles. And it makes them have a flatter surface. And so then when other bubbles hit it, it makes them move around. So we learned something pretty important today. That is, if your experiment doesn't work the first time, if you think about it and make a new hypothesis, a hypothesis is a guess as to why something isn't working, and then you try something else, it might work. So for example, I used refrigerated carbonated water, and when it was cold, it didn't work on the raisins. So then I tried with non-refrigerated, so room temperature, and it's working. They're moving. Hope you enjoy experimenting. Maybe some of yours will even float to the top. You never know. Well, friends, what a fun week we had. I think the best part for me was when we learned what to do when an experiment doesn't work. It doesn't mean you give up. It means that you think about it and try a different way to do it until you figure out what's wrong. We also learned about the earth and the water cycle and what water does for us and how very little water there actually is available to us humans here on Earth. I hope that you enjoyed this week like you have all the others, and I'll see you next week for our final week where we're going to learn about insects. See you all soon. Goodbye. Thank you for being such great explorers with me. Just wanted to remind you that when you're in the woods, take nothing but pictures and leave nothing but footprints. So if you see something really cool, you can look at it with your magnifying glass. If it's safe and a grown-up says it's okay, you can pick it up and look at it more closely. But make sure you put it back so that the woods stay exactly as they are. Bye, friends.